And what we do is we provide them with the support to be able to try to arrive at a resolution. So it's very important. Sometimes when people come to talk to MABS, they go, okay, well, now I've told you, you can sort it out. Unfortunately, there is no magic wand. We need to work in collaboration with clients to ensure that we're able to provide them with a solution that works for their particular circumstances. If you are working with somebody and they need to be referred to MABS, this is just handy to have. There is a Find a MABS office option. So what that will give you is the search there. You can just put in whatever county you're in, and it will show the offices that are in the county. So the way that MABS is configured is we have 10 companies as such. So I work for MABS Support. So that's one of the companies. The other company, which you probably won't have a huge amount of interaction with, is Traveller MABS. And then the others are 8 regional areas. So the country is broken into 8 regions, and within those regions there are a number of offices. There's 52 in all. So there should be somewhere across the country that people can access. I think it's important to say that anybody who's experiencing difficulty, they don't have to go to the local MABS, because sometimes people may feel embarrassment or may feel that they don't want to be identified in their local community as accessing the MABS service. So it isn't a requirement that they go to the one closest to them. So in terms of how MABS works, it is very much about trying to empower people to be able to look after the issue themselves. And we support people through advice, and we can also act as advocates. We can advocate on behalf to creditors, but we cannot take over any aspect without the client's permission. So we have to either have recorded or signed consent from the client to be able to act in that capacity. There is help available for a wide range of things from people who may just, particularly in life where the circumstances change. You find it with perhaps where people have split up from a partner, or where they have been recently widowed, and suddenly they're in a situation, one where either their income is completely reduced, or the other person was always the person that managed the money. So that can be a situation where we can provide support in terms of going through budgeting and trying to teach them the tools of being able to manage that themselves. And then obviously we work into situations where people have far greater debt. You'll see there that utilities are mentioned specifically, particularly over the last 24 months. Utility bills, the scale of the bills, and trying to resolve them have been a significant amount of the work that we've been doing. We can interact with utility companies on behalf of clients. Sometimes they just find it too intimidating to actually have to ring up and go through, particularly older clients, go through VARs and to try to remember which button to press. And also they get very confused if they're not speaking to the same person, or they have a different person every time. So that is one area where we have been trying to provide a lot of support to people. We do engage with the banks as well. Again, that can be around either from a credit or trying to manage loans, or from a mortgage perspective. The face-to-face service, I suppose, is where we see the most benefit for people. When they do go into an office, they will be allocated a money advisor. They will meet the same money advisor all of the time. So they don't need to tell somebody different on each occasion what their backstory is, because having to do it once can often be a very difficult experience for them. The service is free. I mean, I think that is important, because people often come to us in an indebted state, and the last thing that they want to do is feel that they're going to have an additional burden by engaging with anybody. So that is taken care of. And the process, I suppose, really starts off with an honest conversation, and that can be difficult to get to a point of an honest conversation about looking at their income, their expenditure, and trying to understand exactly what the situation is that they're working from. You'll have heard the Awalia information has been kind of re-engaged at the moment, and that's out on the different platforms. And what they provide is within the regions, there's, as well as money advisors, there's what we have are dedicated mortgage arrears advisors. And they can work specifically with people who are experiencing difficulty with mortgages, and they're experts in trying to come up with solutions that can deal with that. Within, if people do end up going to court through repossession court, it can be quite traumatic for them. So we have court mentors in all of the courts, and they are available for people who are going through court proceedings and feel that they need that little expert support. Now, they can't speak on behalf of the client, but they can. What we find quite often is when somebody has been to court and something has happened, they don't necessarily take on board or understand the implications of what's been said. So that's where the court mentor will talk them through exactly what the next steps might be. There is also within the Awalia scheme, there are vouchers available for people who may need to engage either a solicitor, an accountant, or to get legal advice. So there are vouchers for €500 that the clients can access. And there's also, I suppose, the potential of looking at other insolvency options. The insolvency, again, that this is where we are dealing with people who are in a situation of significant debt and trying to manage through that. Within this, the service, we have what are called approved intermediaries, and they can act with the client to contact the creditors to try to come up with a solution, because quite often people feel very isolated that they're trying to deal with this on their own, and either they may not have the capacity, either from a technical perspective or linguistic or even writing skills, to be able to do that. And that's very intimidating. So that is where an approved intermediary would work on their behalf to be able to put forward solutions, suggested outcomes, and that can be quite helpful. There is within the insolvency process what's called a debt relief notice. And, sometimes people, to get out of debt, they'll try and borrow more, or they'll try to go to options that are perhaps high interest loan providers, which can create an even larger situation. And in that case, particularly for vulnerable people who may not have any assets or maybe on low income and whose debts do not exceed €35,000, the MABS can facilitate a debt relief notice, which is essentially a way of engaging with the creditors to try and do a fresh start for people. So it does have implications in terms of there is a supervision period, but it does provide a way of getting out to get to a zero figure and to start again. There are a significant number of other insolvency options, and we can talk through that if that is something that people would be interested in. So if you're concerned about money or falling into debt, that's one of the areas that we would encourage people to get involved with. But there is a series of different kind of triggers that we would say would cause somebody to engage with MABS. I've listed some of them there. So if they're worried about money, or if they have received a letter from a creditor or a court order or anything that is moving it from the regular kind of notice of debt to moving it into a legal context, it should be very important that we get that conversation started. So when you call, the first point of contact for many may be the MABS helpline. So like yourselves, working on a helpline, you hear very many different types of stories. And sometimes because there is a little bit of anonymity there, people are a little bit more willing to engage. So the helpline operates from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday to Friday. And quite often people may ring a question about something around the utility bill. But once we start the conversation, there is generally additional things that come up. That may be things to do with addiction. It could be things to do with debt, loan sharks, a number of areas that can come up. And through that conversation, we're able to guide and give them advice on what the next appropriate steps would be in their particular situation. So the MABS process essentially, kind of outlined the end point there. But so we listen to the story, and it's very important, I think, for people to be listened to, particularly when they're dealing with debt, banks, utility companies. Having the opportunity to speak to somebody is probably the greatest relief to most people. And we can also work at people's individual paces. So if they just want to start the conversation but need a call back or need to follow up a few days later or need to think about it, that's something that can happen. As part of the gathering of information, an assessment will be carried out to see what needs to happen. And then with the client, there is a discussion to determine what works best for them. So that we would never tell people what to do. We outline the options and then ask them how they would feel it best to proceed. We'll implement a plan, and even if they never go into an office, from the helpline, there will typically be follow-up to make sure that things are working or that nothing has, if somebody wishes for them to be contacted, there'll be a follow-up there. And we'll also, particularly if, as part of the process, we've agreed payment plans or payment options, that will be monitored and there'll be a check-in to make sure, both with the client and also with the creditors, to make sure that that is working. And then hopefully this provides the client with the feeling of empowerment to be able to deal with the situation and to ensure that they don't arrive to the same point in the future. I'm going to pause there because that's kind of MABS, what we do, how we engage. Are there any questions or anything that people are concerned about at the moment? Brilliant. I always like to hear silence.
Thanks, Paul. I do have one question.
Sure.
Okay. So I really like what you said about when people phone MABS, there's a conversation and it's about
Yeah.
empowerment and the power of listening. So can you tell us a bit about the people who answer the phones? Are they volunteers, employees?
No, they're employees. So they're employees of the helpline or a specific team. So prior to working in this role, I actually worked on the helpline for a year and a half. So I'm very familiar with the calls, the situations that they deal with. And it is, as I said, it's more often the fact that people have not been listened to that point. So it tends to start with an information download. And then there's a pause and an opportunity to go into the assessment piece. As part of the process, I mean, it is a process. So people will be asked to go through a number of steps. The first will be to get and they will be asked if it's okay to collect this information. They will be asked about their contact information, address, and also their living circumstances. Are they living with anybody? Are they alone? They look at the income. They look at any debts. They look at the expenditure. And then from that kind of gives a picture of maybe where the priorities are, because quite often people have come and said, oh, well, the electricity is going to be turned off. But then we find out they've actually got debts for their rent or for their mortgage, and they're at risk of losing their home. So, it's sometimes when people ring, it's the immediate issue that's cause of concern. But through that conversation, it quite often comes through that there are bigger priorities that they're actually burying their head in the sand about and just can't face. And it can be a relief just to hear, well, that's fine. I hear what you're saying, and there are options. So let's explore what they might be. And I think that quite often people just feel that they don't have any options. So that's really what the purpose of that engagement is.
Okay, so it's quite a multi-layered engagement. It's very human. I wasn't aware of that side of it, of what happens when you phone and the kind of conversation you can expect. So that's really lovely to hear.
Yeah, well, I hope that's the experience that people have. I mean, and I think it is important to say that, sometimes when people are ringing into those situations, they may feel, oh God, I'm getting into a call center and they're going to take my details and I'll never hear from them again. There isn't a time limit on a phone call. So we can be on a call with somebody for an hour and a half if it's needed. So it's driven by the client, not by the system. And I think that's important for people, that they feel that they are treated as an individual, that they are being listened to. And then we obviously confirm that it is a confidential process because people are worried. that this is going to be reported somewhere. And even at the end of the process, so once we've gone through the assessment and we've gone through some of the suggested outcomes, we will ask if they want to go into an office. If they say no, then it goes no further. We can't refer it to an office without their permission. What I would say in terms of support for a number of clients is that they can get anxious about making the phone call. So quite often we have people who are ringing on somebody's behalf, and we can go through that, but we have to have the person's permission to speak to that third party. So
Mhm.
whether it's a friend, we get it quite often, particularly for older people, their children may ring on their behalf, but we need to get the permission of the client to allow us to engage with them.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Paul. So before we move on, does anybody else have any questions or comments so far for Paul?
Lauren, Siobhan here. How are you?
Hi,
Siobhan.
Siobhan.
Thanks, Paul. Paul, you mentioned something about, on a call, somebody might be making a call who does need the services of MABS, but they may bring up other issues on that call that
Yeah.
don't relate. I would presume it's signposting is what the staff on phones would try to do, or what's the story there?
Well, I suppose what they try to do, Siobhan, is that they will absolutely signpost, but what they are very clear on as part of the conversation is what we can do, where we can provide support, and then giving an indication of other resources that might be able to help for the other aspects that are there. I mean, we're not counselors, we're not professional in terms of being able to provide advice. That doesn't mean that we don't get people who have, mental health issues, people who have addiction issues. And, what we try to do is to kind of bite size it, to say, okay, there's a lot going on there for you. What we can deal with now on this call is this particular part. And what I can do then is I can make a recommendation. I can send you on details of other organizations I can link you in with. But I suppose what we try to ensure is that we are there to assist and support. We can't do and we can't take responsibility for them. So that's kind of the context that we work in.
Great,
Does that
thank you,
make
Paul.
sense, Siobhan?
So does. Thank you.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll keep going on, and as I said, if there are any questions, please do ask them, and we'll come back to them. So the context, what we try to do with people when we're working with them in offices, then is we look at the money management as a clear part of this. And we're all familiar with what has led to what they've called the cost of living crisis. Now, I know that they've taken the crisis out of that now. They've just said that it's the cost of living. But if you're in that particular situation, it can be quite often a difficult place to be. So looking at the causes, what we will then do is try to work with individuals to develop a budget. Now, a budget is a tricky one for a lot of people, usually because the starting point is, well, I don't have enough money. And that may well be true, but it's only by kind of going through a process of what we would typically do with people is get them to do spend diaries for a period of time before they come into an office, so that they take a note of everything that they are spending, because quite often people do know that they have a weekly shopping bill. They do know that they have electricity and gas, but they may forget, or they may not count a takeaway that they have, or a Starbucks coffee. I know that doesn't happen for everybody, but there are situations. And the other thing that happens with budgeting is people feel that it's a week to week, and they don't account for the planned expenses. They know there's things like Christmas is going to happen. They know that there may be confirmations, there may be big birthdays coming down the line. And typically what people will focus on is taking that amount out of the month that they are, or the week that they are paid, or else they will have to borrow money against it. And what we're trying to do is to educate that, in fact, what they need to look at is the overall spend over the year, and then make sure that they have essentially three wallets: one for their budget, one for savings, and one for the emergencies. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. We're not talking about them having to split it three ways, but they do at least need to kind of get into the mindset that these things are going to happen and that we'll try to work through it. So it really is about trying to have a conversation about planning for the future and looking at spending and saving. Again, the income people are pretty much aware of what they have, and people can budget to the penny quite often. But it's only once it's written down and they look at kind of forecasting over a period of time that they potentially can see where the upcoming difficulties might be. So, I mean, a lot of the bills are bi-monthly, and that can cause a problem because it's a large amount in one go. But I mean, I think people don't understand that they can engage with utilities to make those bills either monthly, or they can do a level pay plan, which allows them to pay, the same amount every month. That was difficult during the time when the utility costs were going up and up and up. So although you may have planned for a year, the changes in price didn't mean that you had covered all of your bills, but it did mean that you weren't perhaps hit with as big a bill as you thought you might be. The other area where this is important from a budgeting perspective is anybody who's on social welfare. They can through the post office, there is a household budget plan where they can make payments on a weekly basis towards all of the utilities. Again, it makes it a little bit more manageable for people. So, I mean, it just goes through here the detail on how to prepare a budget, which, it probably isn't that useful at the moment, but this is the sort of detail that we would go through with a client to try and see where we can help them from a weekly perspective. There are tools online. Again, that is not going to work for everybody, because some people, once they see online or an app, they go, I'm not up for this. But we also have paper-based, budget tools. And again, if people have literacy problems, then a money advisor in an office will work through that with them, so that they have an understanding of what's going on. Again, that's budgeting. I'm just going to go through this quickly. Sorry, so one of the issues that people always say is, well, I never use much energy. I mean, I don't know why my bill is so big. So if we just have a quick look at something here, just to say that this would be maybe a typical day in somebody's life. And so they start the shower, they have got to get their hair dried, they have breakfast, boil a kettle, and do whatever is needed there. Obviously they'll need lights. The washing and laundry will happen. Maybe you'll wash and use a dishwasher. A tumble dryer might be going, and laptops, tea and toast at a little break sometimes. So then the fridge obviously is on all day, and you might do a quick clean. TVs, Alexa, and the phone charger typically on every day as well. You're cooking the dinner, you decide to do a casserole in the oven, and then so at night time it's a bit chilly, so you put on your electric blanket. So, I mean, do you think that would be reasonable for a typical day? I'll ask you, Lauren, because
I having a look at it now. I would imagine it could be more.
okay. Well, I mean, so we'll say that's a basic,
Hmm.
and we're talking about one person, okay? And
Okay, one
that's
person.
that's the cost. Now, what we'll say at the bottom is that this is done on 43 cent per kilowatt hour, which is what the standard rate is without looking at discounts and everything else. Okay, so if we just go down, so that basically means it's 750 a day is what you're spending on that. Okay, or 52 euros 50 a week, or 455 euros every 2 months. So that is for one person for electricity using a low level of electricity. So that's why it's important. People just think, well, I haven't used much, but the bills can build quite quickly. And that's why it's important that we advise people to look at things like switching their provider, looking for the best tariffs that are available. Because if you don't manage it, then if you're to do that for a family of four, that will work out, because some of the things will be the same for everybody, but it works out at about 850 euros every 2 months. So, quite quickly, your budget, particularly for on a reduced or a small income, it can be gone just by utilities. And the rule that they normally have with this is that the 60% of your electricity goes on heating, 20% on heating the water, and 20% on everything else. So it's heating and ensuring that you have hot water takes 80% of all of the amount that you have there. So, I mean, the reduce, reuse, that's what they will say. So within the systems, the tariffs or something. And again, this is where it can get quite difficult for people to access. The tariffs can and when you use your utilities, can have a significant impact on your budget. So the peak is 5 to 7 when people tend to use everything they're in from work or it's dinner time. And the night tariffs and day tariffs, a lot of them are providing the two tariffs. Again, there's different amounts for both. So it does make sense to try and manage your energy utility, around the right times. There are grants and information there. I mean, I'm not going to go through that in any great detail because, the information is there, but the standard tariff is expensive. And what needs to happen, or what we do with somebody who comes in and says, "But I can't afford the utility," is that we would ask them, or we would engage with them to contact the utility provider and look at the usage over the last 12 months. We'd look at switchers, so things like the CCPC, which is the Consumer Protection Commission. They have ideas on they can do comparisons of where the best value is. E-billing and direct debit usually have a 5 to 7% reduction on bills if you do that. And there are a number of other things that can be done. Food waste is a big issue for people in that, depending on how they buy, when they buy, and what they do. But on average, that they can be losing €60 per month on food waste. The best before dates, some people get very tied up on them. So again, there's options around how they might be able to reduce their food aspect. Shopping around, people tend to just stick with the same providers all the time because that's the habit and that's what they've done. So trying to do shopping around and doing comparisons on all areas, I mean, even from a banking perspective, a lot of people are with the same bank that they maybe put their confirmation money into the bank with. So they haven't even looked to see if they're getting best value. So these are all things that a money advisor would work through with a client as well, once they have a look at the budget, because they can see what I talked about when we talk about the debt. Once they go into a money advisor, they will actually ask them to complete a full budget of all items, including medication, bills, telephones, and see, because sometimes, the people are paying €100 a month for a phone that they could get for $14.99. So there are different aspects to how that can be done. I mean, the only way that you can really manage or change your budget is to either boost your income or to check your spending. They're the only two ways that are doing it. So there's different things that we would do with people to try and be more effective in relation to what they do with the money that they have. And the common budgeting mistakes are, cash flow, giving up too soon, because it does take time. Once they do it 1 week and they go, that's not enough. So it does take time to build up this. Not writing it down. If you don't write it down, some of the items that people might, I suppose, what we call it is the difference between conscious and unconscious buying. So you're conscious that you've got to your weekly shop, but you could pick up a chocolate bar on the way out, or when. So it's making sure that you're aware of everything that you're actually doing with your money. Quite often people go, well, I can survive on a particular amount of money. If it's too stringent, it's a bit like dieting. If you take all of the good stuff out of your life, then it's not worth living, and people will not stick with it. There always needs to be wiggle room, because the emergency fund is probably the most crucial. A boiler may break. a car may need a new tire, the things that you aren't anticipating but will have to pay for. So it's really trying to encourage how that might be done. There's tons of information there in terms of provision. We talked earlier on about, if there are other supports that people might need, that these are specifically around, I suppose, income and expenditure. But what I'll do is I'm going to leave there. Obviously, I'll send this on so you'll have a copy of it. I appreciate that was an absolute whistle tour, but I was hoping that, we could get that out of the way, and maybe then we could start a conversation about what people really have concerns about, or where they feel that they need more information about MABS.
And thank you, Paul, as well, for sharing the slides, because we have had a couple of questions in the chat about if they're available afterwards. That's
Yeah,
very
that's no problem. I'll send those on to Lauren and you can share.
Thank you. Okay, guys, so we'll open up there. See, John has his hand up.
Hi, how's it going? Interesting stuff. I just had a question regarding you mentioned